organizations, campus units, student RSOs have reached out to me because they want to have a focus on equity, inclusion, anti-racism, various departments and other academic units on campus. So again, I won't take up a lot of time today. I absolutely am thrilled that we have Mr. Terry with us today, and I'm sure that our students will gain a lot from hearing your story, Mr. Terry. I'll just touch on a couple of points about my position. Essentially, my role is to provide organizational leadership around our campus efforts toward enhancing our diversity, equity, and inclusion. And there's a term that I like to use when I think of the benefit to our students, and that is we really want you to leave here feeling like you've had an experience that has taught you and given you the opportunities to experience students and various viewpoints just across the diversity spectrum. This is one of the few times that you'll have just to have that freedom to be able to join various organizations and meet students from all over the world with various backgrounds coming to our campus. So I'd say take advantage of those things. As I was preparing for today, one of the things that I thought you might be interested in and I'd like to share with you is one of the things that I learned early on and people asked for as I assumed this role is, can you please help us identify some common language and definitions for the terms diversity, equity, and inclusion? We hear those terms all the time, and for different people, they mean different things. So if you'll allow me to share with you, we do now have some university adopted definitions for those terms that were prepared by the President's advisory board, or the DIAC, I'm sorry, the President's Diversity and Inclusion Advisory Council. So I serve as chair of that council, and the term diversity that our group developed as some common language that any of our campus community are free to use. Diversity is the presence and acknowledgement of differences that includes a spectrum of intersecting identities such as race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, gender identity and expression, sexual orientation, country of origin, language, ability, veteran status, religious affiliations, and life experiences. And in diversity in higher education acknowledges that some populations have been and remain underrepresented. So you'll see that a number of our university efforts are to really ensure that all of our students who come to you, to Illinois State University, have opportunities to thrive, to be themselves, to learn from each other. The term equity, the definition that our group has developed for our campus for the term equity means it includes a commitment to restorative practices that promote equitable treatment, access, opportunity, and advancement among historically marginalized groups and individuals. Such restorative practices include identifying and eliminating barriers that prevent historically underrepresented and underserved groups from having access to resources, information, and social influence. Equity goes beyond acknowledging diversity and advocates for justice regarding historically unbalanced conditions. And then finally, inclusion. Inclusion recognizes diversity, advocates for a commitment to equity, and works to create an infrastructure that works to ensure shared power, opportunities, and resources. Inclusive practices include carving out and sustaining pathways to ensure that traditionally excluded individuals and groups have agency in decision-making and are viewed as valuable and necessary for the organization to thrive. I'm happy to share those definitions with your group. We've been distributing them, but again, that's just an example of one of the roles that someone in my position might have, which is to bring people together, have a shared vocabulary, develop a shared identity, really, that we can all be proud of. So I'm thrilled to be here, and I'm looking forward to hearing the fireside chat. I might mention one other thing for those of you who have an interest. I had one of my students just put together a list of the various organizations that have a relationship in some form or fashion to diversity or represent diverse student groups. And we have on our campus 31 student organizations, both domestic and also international, that focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. So if you haven't had a chance to connect with any of those groups, this is the perfect time. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Houston. We are so happy to have you with us this evening. Since 2016, Dean Samanth has led the College of Business. His leadership has helped make the COB one of the top business schools in the nation, and we appreciate his efforts. Please help me welcome Dean Aj Samanth.
Good evening. It's wonderful to see all of you here. I appreciate all the efforts that our Business Week team has put in to make this event possible. The challenges this year's Business Week team have faced are nothing like any team before them has ever had to overcome, and I applaud your efforts. The events this year have been outstanding. Today, we would like to welcome Mr. Victor Terry. Mr. Terry began as the Chief Diversity Officer and Vice President of Public Affairs for State Farm in 2020. His duties include overseeing efforts to cultivate a work and learning environment that fosters greater diversity and inclusion, and leading the company's communications and media relations teams. Mr. Terry has been with State Farm for over 20 years, and prior to his current role, he was exclusively in sales and sales leadership. He has led teams in Alabama, Georgia, Florida, Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, and Missouri. Mr. Terry is from Birmingham and is a graduate of Samford University. He is also a graduate of the General Management program at Harvard Business School. He and his wife, Terris, have 2 teenage daughters. We would like to thank you for being here tonight, Mr. Terry. Would you like to say a few words before we get started?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dean Samanth, for that warm introduction. I also want to thank Dr. Houston for her comments as well, and the beautiful definitions that you offered. I was smiling from ear to ear as I heard you read those. And really, I want to thank the entire Business Week leaders, the College of Business, and certainly Kai and Lauren, who've done quite a bit to help organize this event, and they've done an excellent job in communication. And so I'm looking forward to tonight, and it's good to be with all of you.
Thank you to Dean Samanth for introducing Mr. Terry. For the structure of the event tonight, Lauren and I will be asking questions in 3 sections, covering topics of Victor's story and background, his role. We want this to be an engaging event for Victor and the audience. Audience members can submit follow-up questions throughout the event, and we will monitor the chat. If you would like to ask your question yourself, please just comment your name in the chat and we will call on you to unmute yourself. Just please be clear and concise. You can also put your question in the main chat if you would like, and we can ask it that way. If you don't feel comfortable asking your question, you can private message me, Kai, and I can ask it for you. Click chat and click the little arrow and select Kai when you direct message. Now we will move on to the questions for tonight, starting with Victor's story and background. So our first question is, can you talk about your background and your role models growing up?
Yeah, I sure can, Kai. Again, I'm excited to be with all of you this evening. Thank you again for the invitation. And I'm looking forward to the experience. Again, I appreciate Dean Samanth reading my bio, but I want to do something a little different to get us started. A couple of years ago, through our diversity and inclusion platform, we created a new way for those of us at State Farm to get to know one another. It's completely voluntary, but it's designed for us to go kind of beneath the surface and below our corporate bios, the different jobs we've had, the different places that we've lived. And we call this platform, I Am Who I Am. So Kai, I would like to share my I Am Who I Am story with the audience tonight. I am Victor Terry. I grew up a free lunch kid in a single parent home in Birmingham, Alabama. Now, I do not have a sense of shame about that, but rather a sense of pride because I know how far I've come. I'm the oldest of three, and my baby sister works for State Farm. I'm the product of an initiative to further integration in Birmingham City schools by way of school busing from the 4th grade through the 12th grade. It took me 2 buses and about 1.5 hours to get to school every day for most of my childhood. Now, despite a less than privileged set of circumstances, I was surrounded and raised by loving maternal and paternal extended families. My 2 grandmothers, who passed away in 2018 and 2019, and the lives that they led were examples of unfailing love, sacrifice, dedication to family. And they rooted me in the idea of having the right principles, showing grace, working hard, and having the right amount of pride in self. It is through them that I've been given a sense of all that is truly important in life. Every day I strive to extend these elements to my wife, Therese, who I've known since the 6th grade. Our 2 amazing daughters, Malia and Morgan, my siblings, Corey and Crystal, friends and colleagues. I've had more mentors than I can count, and I've been fortunate to be invited into the lives of many people from whom I have learned a great deal. My Christian faith has brought me through many personal peaks and valleys, and I am immeasurably grateful to have a career at State Farm, an organization that has continued to allow me the opportunity to earn the trust and confidence to serve others at a high level. I'm a Samford University graduate, but I yell Roll Tide on the weekends with my family. I am Victor Alexander Terry. I am who I am. Now, that platform that I shared with you, Kai, is hopefully it had the intent or the impact on you that was originally intended. And it's designed to do a couple of things. Below our titles and our jobs and our responsibilities and the things that are bestowed upon us in the corporate world, or even as leaders in a collegiate setting, there is more to us than meets the eye. And it's through these stories that we find ways of connecting with one another. And through that connection creates a more inclusive environment. And we believe at State Farm, when we act in the spirit of inclusivity, over time, the outcome is more diversity. So thank you for allowing me to share that story. And hopefully in that, you heard a little bit about who my mentors were. My grandmothers were a very big part of my life and had a lot to do with shaping me with who I am today.
Thank you for sharing that, Victor. And our next question, we have a lot of college students obviously with us on this call. Was there a significant event or experience you had in college that helped shape who you are today?
Yeah, very much so. Not only shaped who I am today, but shaped where I am today. So I'll try to make a rather lengthy story short. So when I graduated from high school, I originally enrolled at the University of Alabama, and so did my girlfriend, now my wife, along with many of my classmates, the people that I went to high school with. However, unfortunately, my mother, her entire career, we call them executive assistants today. Back then, they were called secretaries. So she was a secretary through my entire childhood. And she couldn't afford to send me to college. So I was at Alabama 100% on student loans. In addition to that, I really didn't have the means, my mother didn't have the means to, kind of help me just kind of put money in my pocket. So I was working part-time at a very popular fast food restaurant that normally has a line around the building, and a full-time student. And you can imagine the stress and anxiety that put on my mother. So she made a decision. She had a really good job being the assistant to the president of a local or regional coffee company. But she ended up taking a job at Samford University, paying less money because she knew that as an employee of Samford, you and your immediate family members, if accepted, could go to school tuition free. So I was able to go to Samford University, a private institution that offers a very good education, tuition free my last 3 years. However, Kai, I have to share with you, I didn't really enjoy it. I was kind of in my element in Alabama, and while it is a predominantly Anglo institution, it had a fair amount of diversity in which I found comfort, which I did not find at Samford. And the little bit of diversity that Samford had were normally student athletes, and I was not one, and so I didn't really fit into that group. And so I remember going really an entire day. So another element is I commuted. So my mother and I would drive, she would go to work, I would go to class, I would spend all day on campus, and we would go back home together. So the on-campus life really wasn't available to me. And I just remember really being unhappy and not really feeling like I was in a inclusive environment. It wasn't exclusive, but it wasn't consciously inclusive. The great thing about Samford is they have really small classrooms. And so one of my business school professors, his name is Dr. Bill Service, and he's actually retiring this year after multiple decades of teaching, always made himself available to his students like most professors do. They offer to come by and, they have office hours and you can come by and see them. And so one day I was passing by Dr. Service's office and I decided to stop in. That meeting really changed the trajectory of my collegiate career. It's through the mentorship of Dr. Service, it's through his coaching of me, it's through his willingness to share with me that he knew I had more to offer than what I was providing in class. His desire to see me be the best version of myself really kind of lit a fire in me that I didn't have before. And so I trusted him, I respected him, and I took all the advice that he gave me, one of which was to join the professional business fraternity, which was Alpha Kappa Psi. And after joining that business fraternity, I actually ended up becoming not only the first underclassman as a sophomore, but the first minority to be the president of the professional business fraternity. And it's through that experience and just a whole host of things that kind of happened after that really began to shape me and mold me in a really meaningful way. And I'll wrap this up by saying not only was Dr. Service instrumental in that moment in saying, hey, I know there's more in you than what I'm getting out of in your class. He also made the introduction of me to State Farm. So through his network, he made some introductions, gave me a couple of people to call. I took him up on that offer. And that's really how my State Farm career began. So I, kind of took a situation that, in the moment, wasn't the best. And it was through a mentor, someone who cared and was willing to pour into me that made a tremendous difference in my life. And I still thank him to this day. We still keep in touch, Dr. Service. I call him Bill. We're friends now. He knows my children. And when we go to Birmingham, we always go see him.
Thank you for talking more about your experience. So with you being the Chief Diversity Officer, what does diversity and inclusion mean to you? And how were you involved in diversity and inclusion before becoming the Chief Diversity Officer?
Sure, I appreciate that question. Well, the first thing I would say is we take a very broad definition of diversity at State Farm. And oftentimes it can be so easy to only focus on race and ethnicity and then gender and then kind of stop. But when I talk about diversity at State Farm in very similar ways that I heard Dr. Houston, I am always talking about sexual orientation, faith, religion, ability, disability, age, so on and so forth. And so, unfortunately, sometimes our conversations get caught in just race and ethnicity and gender, but in the back of my mind, all of those elements apply. So we define diversity at State Farm as the collective strength of the experiences, the skills, the talents, the perspectives, and the culture that each of our associates and employees bring to the table. And then we go on to define inclusion as respecting and valuing all of those unique dimensions and how they bring them to the table, and then recognizing that all of our employees are at their creative best when they work in an inclusive environment. So the second half of your question, prior to becoming our first formal Chief Diversity Officer, and I say formal, we had a senior leader who was really who had been operating in that role for several years, but we had not formalized the role until the summer of last year. But prior to that, I've been an active volunteer leader in the space of diversity and inclusion for quite some time. For about a decade, I served as the executive sponsor of the African American Forum and practically a member of all 12 of our employee resource groups, and have just really always saw it as a part of my leadership responsibility to be involved in all things employee engagement. And so it's always been a treat for me to do my part to contribute to a positive climate and culture at State Farm.
Yes, thank you, Victor. And our next question is, there is a mentor program as a part of Business Week, and we have a lot of those mentors and mentees with us tonight. And I know you touched on this a bit, but how did mentorship have an impact on you early in your career?
Sure. Well, a lot of people have, when they think about a mentor, or they have an opportunity to reflect on a mentor, some people can kind of reflect on one person that's been constant throughout their whole life. To some degree, that might be true for me, but I would say more of my mentee experience and having mentors has been different people at different times throughout my life. So you heard me talk about Dr. Service, I call him Bill, and what he meant to me and still does to this day. But immediately after walking in the door in the Birmingham Operations Center, which by the way happens to be less than a mile on the same street as the university that I attended and graduated from. So it was literally right down the street. We just have a culture at State Farm where connecting and making people feel a part of the organization, especially when they walk in the door, is something that's really unique to us. And I felt that almost immediately. And I have had people throughout my career, through no prompting of my own, who have just saw fit to offer wise advice and counsel, who've given me that advice and counsel, sometimes when I didn't even ask for it, and then maybe I didn't fully appreciate it, but later I always did. And then certainly, when you have those moments where you need someone who has more experience than you do to kind of help you navigate a certain situation, I've had people from all walks of life who've been willing to do that. It's been a real treat, and it's a really neat part of our culture that I'm really proud of.
Yes, thank you for talking about that more. So before we move on to the next section, we do have a question. And this was a question: would you include diversity of thought in D&I?
Yeah, absolutely. I would include diversity of thought in D&I. And I would say that we refer to that as perspectives as we define it. I do think, though, not so much present today, but I remember a couple of years ago, there was an emergence of diversity of thought, and it felt like there was an attempt for that to lead the way with regard to diversity. And at least how it felt to me, maybe have the other elements that we tend to think about take a second share. And I'm really thankful that that did not play out. Now, diversity of thought is a part of that full comprehensive view of diversity. But let's not kid ourselves. Representation matters. It matters with regard to all those primary elements that we see: gender, race, ethnicity, even age. Representation makes a big difference. And then there are other elements that may not be as evident, but as people are willing to share and be vulnerable and transparent, people may share sexual orientation, their faith, their religion. Maybe they're living with a disability. All of those things are critical, important elements, and should not be minimized. But I agree that diversity of thought is important in terms of that comprehensive definition.
Awesome. Thank you, Victor. And we have a question from Nick Kutris. So Nick, could you unmute yourself and ask your question, please?
Yeah, I just want to thank you again for coming out. Is there any advice you would give to a student who's interested and passionate about D&I and wants to have a career in the field?
Sure. Well, yes is the short answer to that question. But I'll tell you, Nick, this advice would be the same regardless of what your area of interest is. And that is, 1, get involved, and 2, be a leader. Now that sounds really simplistic, and it may sound almost like a throwaway comment or throwaway advice, but here's what I would tell you. I talked a lot about doctor service. So I'll go back to my time at Samford. What I decided to do was really kind of release myself from whatever I felt like was holding me back, and getting involved and willing to lead, willing to be vulnerable, be transparent. The collegiate experience is very unique, and you get the chance to really hone your skills and really form and shape who you are in an environment that practically doesn't have any consequences when it comes to being a leader. This is really where you want to fail and make some mistakes and figure out how to get better and realize what you like and what you don't like. So whether it be diversity and inclusion or some other areas, I heard Dr. Houston already mention the multiple organizations on campus that are reflective of the D&I track that you can get involved in. And then when you show up, ask how you can be most helpful and get to work. And it's through those experiences that I think will make you a better individual contributor and hopefully a better leader down the line as you become a professional. They also help kind of shape your own leadership philosophy, which will evolve over time. But those early experiences, I think, really lay a strong foundation for you as you move forward.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Nick, for your question. And now we will move on to talking about Victor's role as Chief Diversity Officer, which is definitely a newer position within a lot of companies. And we're really excited to hear more. And hopefully you all will have a lot more knowledge on this position. So you are the first, and you called it more of the official CDO in the company's almost 100-year history. What prompted the creation of this position at State Farm?
Well, I'd start by saying, D&I for us is not new. We've really been on this journey for about 2 decades. We had an Office of Diversity that was created as far back as 2002. And that has just simply kind of grown and expanded over the years. You heard me mention employee resource groups. We used to call them affinity groups, but we have 12 employee resource groups. We have about 10,000 members in those employee resource groups, and they cover the full gamut of diversity, including veterans. So we have a military affinity group. It includes like a parenting group, so think working mothers, women in technology, a women networking group, a young business professionals group, in addition to ones that you would expect. So our Pride group, our Hispanic employees group, African American Forum, minority men, et cetera. I'm leaving out a couple of the 12 here. But we've continued to grow and have gotten more mature. The other thing I would say, we have developed this 4-part framework. So we think about D&I in the terms of workplace, marketplace, community, and then supplier diversity. And all of that is really built on, our good neighbor philosophy, which is really central to everything we do. And kind of those principles kind of unify us. So I have to lay that foundation first before I get to, well, how did we get to this point? Well, clearly, Memorial Day 2020 was a watershed moment, not just for the United States, but globally. The murder of George Floyd that we watched on our phones, on our tablets, or on TV really just brought the attention of social injustice front and center. And during a time where we were really still in the early stages of the pandemic, most of us were at home, we weren't going out a lot, there were really very few distractions. And so we got pulled into this moment that created this avenue. Unfortunately, Mr. Floyd had to die, but it created this avenue for diversity and inclusion to be reignited in a way that I would say is really unique, probably since the Civil Rights Movement. And of course, we had the killing of Ahmaud Arbery, we had the killing of Breonna Taylor and others, and all of these things just kind of came together. And so clearly, the protests and the outcry, again, not just in the United States, but globally, really put us in the position where we said, we have an opportunity to do more. We need to take that opportunity to do more, to be a good neighbor, to really step out and be more vocal and use our voice. We've always been an organization of good, and that is evidence-based. We have a track record that I would put up against any Fortune 500 company, Fortune 100 or Fortune 50 company. But now we are telling our story more and making it known that we believe we have a role to play. We can't solve the problem of the divide in our country. We can't solve social justice, but we can certainly do our part to affect those things, including racial equity.
Yes, thank you for talking more about the story and the creation of your role. So now can you talk about the overall duties of being the Chief Diversity Officer and how your position interacts with other areas within the company?
Sure. A couple of things I would do. I know there is you have a graphic that kind of shows our broad D&I structure. So if we could put that up, I'd like to speak to it for just a moment, because I think it does a couple of things. It says a little bit about where we are in our path to our maturity path and our desire to be even more mature. And then this graphic kind of speaks to the role that I play. Now, there are a lot of words here. I'm not going to read all this, but I really just want to kind of focus on the headlines that you see there. So that very top portion, you see a Diversity Inclusion Governance Council. This is brand new. This is something that I started in the fall of last year. And the Governance Council, I chair the Governance Council, including me. There are 10 senior leaders that help shape, refine, and drive our strategy that we already have with regard to D&I. Everything you see below here, which I'll speak to, had been in place, but we had not yet had the concerted, focused, and intentional senior leader engagement as a body. We've certainly had individual leaders. We've certainly had our president and chairman and CEO, but this body of individuals is really important. 2 of those individuals sit on CEO staff. The others are in very influential and significant roles across the organization. So that's very new. I chair that council. Underneath there, you have an Enterprise Diversity and Inclusion Council. We have dozens of members in this group, and they are at the individual department level. And so what they help us with is the tactical execution of the strategy that the governance council and I come up with. They help us execute it, but that governance council are the ones who are helping shape and refine that strategy and acting as a significant influence lever for the organization. Then all of that is supported by our employee resource groups. I've already spoken to that, so I won't say much more unless there are other questions. Supplier diversity, while that does not report to me, our supplier diversity arm is under purchasing. I have a very close connection and relationship with that group and everything that we're doing there. And then enterprise diversity and inclusion, really what that is my staff. So including me, there are 16 full-time people who wake up every day thinking about how we advance diversity and inclusion at State Farm. And what I've learned since being in this CDO role is everything that I've described here for you and that 16-person full-time staff is more robust than any other organization I've seen, with one exception. And that organization happens to be global, and they have about 20 people full-time on their staff. And so it's the intentionality, the investment of resources, the budget that is aligned with all this that speaks to our commitment. Now you can take this away, and I'll share a little bit more about, so how do I operate? So I think it's also important for you to mention, so I report to our C-suite, I report to our chief administrative officer, who reports to our CEO. So I'm very close proximity with the senior most leader in our organization. I have monthly one-on-ones, monthly hour-long one-on-ones with our chairman, president, and CEO, and regular interactions with our board of directors, both in my role as vice president of public affairs and as chief diversity officer. And so I get the opportunity to really take a global view of our organization and really act as a strategic mechanism to really bring focus to our efforts and really help us become a more mature organization. This 2-decade path that we've been on that I've described, I would describe it as very effective, highly programmatic, and low to moderate leader led. And so our objective over the course of this next year is to have more leaders see their individual responsibility as including D&I as much as it does everything else, and then ultimately land at a point where we are at the highest levels of D&I maturity, where it's fully integrated into everything that we do.
Yes, thank you, Victor, for explaining more about the structure of D&I at State Farm. And the next question we have, we know you took on this position in the middle of the pandemic. It was during the summer of last year when the pandemic was going on. So what was the biggest challenge in accepting the role of first CDO in the company's history, but also the biggest opportunity that you saw when taking on this position?
Well, to say it was a kind of a flashpoint moment would be an understatement. The way I've casually described what that felt like after being announced, it really felt like being shot out of a cannon. It was, I would say the biggest challenge was, as well as we have done in D&I, it was clear to me that there was still a lot of pent up aspirations, pent up concerns, pent up challenges, prior experiences that people wanted to share, lots of great ideas. And so the biggest challenge was not being able to get to everyone. I would probably be underestimating at 1,000 of the number of emails that I got just from our employees, all the way from congratulations to, Victor, I have a story to tell and I need to share it with you. And in the middle was, congratulations, Victor, here are the 20 things we need you to do, and I'll follow up with you in 2 weeks and see how it's going. So all of these are well-intentioned, and in the minds of the people, sending them appropriately placed. But you can imagine, no one would have the capacity to be responsive to all of those. I certainly did respond to all of those, but I was unable to engage at the level that everyone would have expected. And the number of ideas and opportunities that we have, both inside the organization and compared to other organizations, was pretty grand. I would say the biggest opportunity, though, and I've kind of referenced this earlier, is, and I'm already starting to see it. I saw it almost immediately because of that watershed moment that I described. More people started showing up in a way to say, I have more to do. I want to take more ownership and accountability for how I help State Farm get better. Now, when I say that, Lauren, I'm not suggesting these are folks that were on the sideline. Like when diversity and inclusion is brought up, no one says that's a bad idea, right? So no one argues it. Everyone supports it. It makes sense. We all say, everyone nods their head, but sometimes unintentionally, it can be processed as, hey, that's great. That's a good thing. I'm all for it. We have people that do that, right? Well, what we are seeing now more and more with each passing month is every leader is saying, hey, I own that. That's a part of my leadership responsibility. And Victor, I will leverage your team and the tools and resources you have to execute on that responsibility, rather than just asking you to come do your D&I thing in my department meeting. And that has just been amazing to see. It's incredibly powerful. And that's exactly the path that we want to stay on until we get to that highest level of D&I maturity.
Yes, thank you for talking more about like challenges you faced and the opportunities that you saw. For our next question, what initiatives do you plan on addressing as CDO at State Farm?
Sure. Well, we have a strategic roadmap, Kai, and we have 3 broad objectives within that roadmap. Number 1 is to bed diversity and inclusion into all aspects of our business. And you've heard me speak about what that means. The second is to promote diversity at all levels. So you've heard me talk about representation. Again, across a broad spectrum of diversity is really important. And then third is to model inclusion in everything we do. And I would probably even start with modeling inclusion. I've borrowed some language that I picked up somewhere. I'm not sure where I picked it up from, but being consciously inclusive in everything that we do. See, I believe the magic of D&I is really in our daily habits and behaviors. Diversity is an outcome. You either have it or you don't, and you can define it multiple ways. We've described that. Inclusion is something that you do. It's an action. But instead of it being, it needs to be intentional, but rather than it being scheduled, right? Rather than it being a special meeting or special day or a special agenda topic that's at the end and we're kind of running over time. And so we had 30 minutes for it, but now we only have 10 and we kind of rushed through it and we said we did our D&I duty. My aspiration for myself and for our organization is that it becomes a part of what we do in the same way that we talk about integrity. So we don't think about integrity as like a special day or today I'm going to demonstrate integrity. No, we all assume that we have it and that we practice it in our words, in our habits, in our behaviors, in our actions, in our decision making. That's what I want diversity and inclusion to be, especially inclusion to be for us at State Farm. And so when we do that, we want to focus on our people through things like training, and we want to ask ourselves, how do we feel about representation? What do we aspire to be? We want to focus on process and do self-assessments within the individual departments within the organization. And then last, but certainly not least, and I wouldn't even say last, is we want to create value for our customers. At the end of the day, all of the things that we're doing is about growing State Farm. It's about helping us maintain our leadership position that we've had for almost eight decades. And it's about growing more customers and keeping those customers with State Farm. And if we execute on those things, we believe it's an important part of that business strategy.
Yes, definitely. And Victor, we have another question from one of our audience members. So Nathaniel, if you would like to unmute and ask your question.
Hi, Victor. Thank you so much for coming to talk to us. I think it's such an honor to come and hear from you. You're very insightful. But my question is, well, it does seem that you have a lot of support from leadership, but how would you address resistance to your diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And clearly, everyone is at a different path in their journey, right? And there's some people that are not quite convinced that we need to be talking about this topic. But here's what I generally try to do. All of us, no matter who you are, no matter what your background is, no matter what your privilege is, and we all have privilege in some shape, form, or fashion, almost all of us know what it feels like to be excluded for whatever reason. But let's just say there's some unique mythical person who's never been excluded. They know someone or care deeply about a family member or a close friend who's been excluded, and they know how that made them feel. And they know what exclusion feels like. So what I try to encourage people to do is not necessarily focus on why we're different, but really center on, we know what exclusion feels like. We know we don't like it. We know what exclusion looks and feels like for the people that we love. We know how upset that makes us, probably even more so when it's someone that is very close to us. So why wouldn't we want to create an environment where people feel more included and less exclusion? And so then we come back to all those reasons why people feel excluded. It could be because of their social political beliefs, or diversity of thought, or it could be because of their gender or their age or race or ethnicity, their sexual orientation. And if we center on that, I believe it's a great starting place for us in order to move forward. The other thing I'm really grateful for, our president and chairman and CEO, Michael Tipsor, talks all the time about, these are kind of the conversations that we need to have, even if we don't agree. And so we should strive to listen, to learn. We still may not agree, but we can honor and respect the perspectives of other people and attempt to learn. The third thing that I say, and I encourage people to share their experiences. That's why I share my I am who I am story. And I talk about my experience, my original experience at State Farm and how it ended, at Stanford University, but it ended beautifully at the end. No one can debate my experiences. Your experiences are not up for debate. And so as people share their experiences, there's just simply no debate. They are what they are. We want to listen to those. We want to find connections to those, because a lot of times we can. And then we want to try to grow from how people share their experiences. And what I found is that I think most people can accept that approach and then start to make progress in being more inclusive and then celebrating diversity.
Thank you so much.
And then we have another question from Joy. You can go ahead and unmute your mic now.
Hi, Mr. Terry. There are a couple of things that you've said that have piqued my interest. Well, more than a couple, but they said keep it concise. But you mentioned that in this past year, we've been talking about things surrounding diversity and inclusion that haven't been talked about before. And it's monumental. And then also how the diversity of State Farm is composed of the experiences of the people who make up State Farm. But how do you create that atmosphere where people are comfortable sharing? Because I don't know, some people don't feel comfortable sharing their experience, but then also some people aren't receptive to what others have been through or have to say. So how do you create that open atmosphere, excuse me, at State Farm?
Yeah. Well, you're right. Not everyone is willing to share. So the I am who I am, you heard me mention that very intentional. It's voluntary. So not everyone does it. And I would say they all look and sound different. I chose to be transparent and vulnerable in mine. But I will tell you that decision didn't come easy. I thought long and hard about it. I knew if I was going to do it, I was only going to do it one way. That's just how I'm wired. And so the platform was out there for a while before I chose to do it because I had to be okay telling my truth. I've been with this company 23 years. I've been an executive for almost 15 years. I have a great track record. I love to say I have a great personal brand and reputation. I like to believe I've garnered the appropriate type of influence. You don't just walk around telling people you grew up a free lunch kid, right?
Mm-hmm.
It takes some courage to share that. But something inside of me said, if you share this, it's going to have meaning for other people. And I will tell you, the first time I shared that in a public setting, really kind of like today after being announced, I lost count of the number of emails I got from people who said, thank you. I grew up free and reduced lunch too, or I grew up in a single parent household, or I was bused to school in this city and state. And so it's that connection that I think brings us together, which creates an environment where we can get the most out of diversity and inclusion. So we don't require people to be vulnerable. Not everyone's ready. Some people have an I am who I am story that's not as vulnerable. I would just say, I don't want to give it a negative connotation, but I would just say it just doesn't go where I chose to go, and that's fine. But we hope to create an environment where when more people are willing to share, others become more and more comfortable, and we're starting to see that happen at State Farm. The other thing I would say, we've made it very clear. I talked about our president and chairman and CEO, Michael Tipsword. The way he has described diversity and inclusion for us, what it means to him personally and why it's important to State Farm, I always describe it as unapologetic and unambiguous. So he has made it crystal clear about the importance, and he does not apologize for how he has created a platform for us to have these discussions. So it's a part of our values. And so when I rarely encounter people who are just so challenged that, they can't hardly stand it. But, I just tell people, these are our values. And you have to get comfortable with these kinds of discussions. Now, you can choose to engage or not, but these are the kind of discussions we have, and we're going to continue to have them. They're a part of our values going forward.
Awesome. Thank you. And I appreciate your vulnerability as well.
Well, it's very liberating once you do it. Everybody has their own journey to take on how vulnerable they're willing to be.
Thank you, Joy, for your question. So we had a direct message question. Can associates who are not veterans join the veterans group to learn more about their perspectives and challenges? Absolutely.
All of our ERGs are open to anyone, any employee at State Farm. There are no limitations at all. They can also serve in leadership roles. So you do not have to be a veteran or be a certain gender or be of a certain race or ethnicity to join an ERG, nor to have a leadership role in that employee resource group.
That's great to hear. And now we have a question from Adrian. So Adrian, if you could unmute real quick and ask your question.
Thank you, Laura, and thank you so much, Victor, for being here and giving up your time. So my question today is, what's your favorite part about being the Chief Diversity Officer and working at State Farm?
Well, I'll start with the latter because I've worked at State Farm longer than I've been Chief Diversity Officer. I still, it's one of the best kept secrets in America. People don't stay with a company as long as our average employees do for no reason. It truly is like a family. The culture and climate at this organization has been good to me from day one. It's created incredible opportunity for me to thrive, to perform, and to be rewarded for that performance. And so I say all the time, there's no question my life is 100 times better than it might have been otherwise, but for my affiliation with State Farm. I've met some great people along the way. I've worked in a lot of different places. You heard a little bit of that in my bio. It's just been a great experience. And it's just a pleasure for me to show up in a way to maintain that climate and culture and enhance it so that the person that's coming in the door today gets to experience the same thing that I've experienced. I would say, the most enjoyable part of being Chief Diversity Officer is, seeing the excitement and the level of ownership and accountability from so many leaders across the organization, how they are stepping up and wanting to do more. From the very beginning, I told folks, don't wait on the Chief Diversity Officer for you to figure out what you need to do next. You have a pretty good sense of what's going on in your department. You can certainly talk to your employees. We all have access to tools and resources where we can educate ourselves and figure out, what are the right things that we need to do in order to advance the conversation for those that we lead. And so many leaders at State Farm have done that, and it's just been a real pleasure to watch it grow. The other thing I would say, another important role that I have is I'm the Vice President of Public Affairs, and I cherish it as equally as I do the CDO role. Now, some people may scratch their heads and go, well, how are those two connected? I think it's a beautiful marriage because I get to lead the communications apparatus of a Fortune 34 company that's been in business almost 100 years and has been the market leader for 8 decades. That's pretty powerful, not only internally, but externally. And so a lot of what you see externally from State Farm, from our social media platforms, from the marketing and advertising we do, the public relations that we do, even the storytelling that we do inside of our walls that unless you're an employee, you don't get to see, they all reflect the full gamut of diversity and inclusion. And so it's a real pleasure to be able to have the ability to lead both of those teams. When I explain that to CDOs outside of State Farm, they wish they had that opportunity. So I consider myself really blessed to have it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the response.
You bet.
And for our next question tonight, bringing in more diverse hires is normally an important initiative in D&I, but how important is evaluating and changing the work environment so these diverse hires can be given equal access to supportive work environment and opportunities for advancement?
Yeah, I love that question. So today, about 60% of our hires are minority, and about 40% of our hires are women. So we do a great job at hiring people and bringing them inside the organization. You haven't heard me use the word equity yet. And so I was smiling as I heard Dr. Houston explain her definition. I would not say it's absent within our conversations at State Farm, but I would say we haven't formalized our platform to include that, but it's something that I talk about. And I think we need to do some work in order to really appreciate what that means, because I think for a lot of organizations who haven't quite got there yet, I think equity is one of those things that there's still very broad interpretations of what that means. Most people can get their heads around diversity. I think that's pretty straightforward. Increasingly more and more people can get their head around inclusion. Equity is something that it could mean one thing or another. For a lot of people, they focus on outcomes. So they focus on representation. So, how many employees do you have? How many in leadership, how many executive, things of that nature. how I choose to think about equity, and so this is my personal leadership view. State Farm has not adopted, so I want to be clear. This is kind of how I choose it. I am a big fervent believer in equity and opportunities to develop and grow so that people can compete for more responsibility if they choose to, or provide more effort to the organization and whatever their role is. So rather than, I would say, in addition to focus on outcomes, I think just as much, if not more, attention needs to be focused on how do we give people equitable opportunities to grow and develop, which means that those opportunities are unique to the individual and speaks to maybe the lack of representation that we may have in a particular area. And so if we know we don't like the outcomes that we're getting, the obvious question is, well, what are we going to do about it? And do we have people that we need to develop so that they can compete? That's an intentionally chosen word. I have a belief, so this is an opinion, I have a belief that most underrepresented groups don't want to be given anything. They want to compete and earn it. They just want to make sure they have a fair shot to compete, and they want to be developed and trained and groomed just like everyone else. That's all I've ever wanted. And thankfully, I've been afforded that. And so it's really important to me that we kind of mature that thinking throughout the organization. It's there, but I'd like to mature it even more and have it spread even further to every corner, nook, and cranny of our organization. So it really becomes, again, a part of our habits and behaviors, not a thing that we do, but it's how we show up, how we present ourselves, how we interact every single day.
Thank you to the audience for those amazing questions, and Victor for your great answers. So now we will move on to the last topic covering D&I and State Farm. So for our first question, can you discuss the D&I structure within State Farm and were there areas you specifically wanted to focus on to improve?
Yeah. So you heard me kind of shared what our structure is already. So I don't know if I will go through that, but I will say, we think about, so I talked about our four-part framework: workplace, marketplace, community, and supplier diversity. What I have borrowed from the practice of D&I are the four imperatives. So the moral imperative, the legal imperative, the talent imperative, and the business imperative. The moral imperative and the legal imperative are pretty straightforward and pretty easy to do, generally speaking. So moral is about just doing the right thing, right? Legal is about, there are laws against discrimination in the workplace. But talent in business is really where I spend most of my time focused on, because those are the ones that I think if we ground ourselves in keeping top talent, attracting top talent, and if we ground ourselves in diversity and inclusion being important to growing State Farm, it doesn't always remove, but I think it reduces the distractions that people tend to have, and maybe some of the mental hangups and obstacles when it comes to this topic. Here's one thing I know about all the employees at State Farm. They all love this company. They all want to see us grow. They want us to remain number one. And so what I try to help them understand is why D&I is important. There's a couple statistics that I share. So I recently read a report by a think tank called the Brookings Institution, and it shared that 54% of the United States population is millennial or younger. So all of our students tonight fall in that category. Now, the oldest millennials are about 40, 41-ish. So if you take anyone about 40, 41 and younger, there are more people in that group than anybody else in the United States. But that's not the most important part. Most important part is 1/2 of that group considers themselves a racial or ethnic minority. Now that's really important for a 100-year-old organization in a mature industry that has led the market for almost 80 years, and that most customers, whether we believe it or not, most customers believe our primary product is a commodity. So if that's true, you have to differentiate yourself in a way that's meaningful, and you have to serve that population with empathy. So with 54% of the population being millennial or younger, half of that group considers themselves a racial and ethnic minority, and those two numbers are only going to grow. So what I try to share with leaders and employees at State Farm is, if you care about State Farm, you have to show up every day thinking about, how do I serve those customers with empathy? Because that's who we're going to grow with. We know the segment of the population that we really dominate, and there's not much competition. But this part of the population, there's a ton of competition. A lot of that group is in motion, meaning they may be willing to switch companies, whatever the case may be. So we really have to show up in a way that's meaningful to them. The other statistic that I picked up recently from a business partner is that, and now this is a global statistics, but I'm sure it applies appropriately in the United States, that 77% of talent professionals, so think about people who recruit talent, scout talent, are always working to bring people into whatever organization they represent. 77% of those talent professionals say diversity is going to be critical to their success going forward. So this is about business. This is, in addition to doing the right thing and that legal imperative, this is about business. This is about growing our organization. And so I believe, when we root ourselves in that, we can find ourselves really being able to kind of center on that, and then each of us, do our part.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you so much, Victor. And definitely, there's so many studies about diverse teams, how they make companies better, and companies are more innovative. So it's definitely true. And I'm glad you brought that point up. Our next question. So obviously all of us probably know the State Farm slogan, like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. If you don't, I don't know. It's always so popular. But when it comes to being a good neighbor, how does that relate to D&I initiatives at State Farm and the workplace environment?
Well, we really strive to have it embedded in everything that we do. You would expect me to say that, but we really do. When it comes to our workplace, we always strive to treat all associates with respect and dignity. We always seek to interact with our customers and suppliers in that very same way. I would say it's how we show up in the community through charitable giving and our philanthropy efforts. And these are all things we've done for a long time. We didn't start these, after Memorial Day of 2020. It's really been a part of our story, and we have an opportunity to simply just enhance that, to embrace diversity, not only because it's the right thing to do, but also to grow our organization and to tell that story more. State Farm for a long time, and we're still a bit this way. We do good work. And for a long time, we didn't want to get the credit. We actually kind of avoided talking about it. And I think that was the motivation behind that was well placed, and it was honorable, and it was beyond reproach to do the right thing in the communities, but not getting credit or not wanting to kind of pat ourselves on the back. But we know today the marketplace that we serve cares deeply about topics like diversity and inclusion. They care deeply about environmental topics. They care deeply about governance. So we have to be able to share. And by the way, these topics aren't just important to people who might be of a diverse background, racially or ethnically speaking. People from all walks of life care very deeply. I mean, if the summer of 2020 taught us anything, if we think back to those protests that we saw on television and globally, and how diverse the crowd was and how young the crowd was, if it taught us anything, these issues cut across that entire group. And so if you're going to compete in the market today, this has to be a part of your strategy. It's that important.
Yes, thank you for touching more on State Farm's slogan. And I know you just mentioned it, but you also mentioned it earlier in our discussion. But State Farm placed a statement on their D&I site shortly after the death of George Floyd, calling out his and others' tragic deaths and how society still suffers from hatred and racism. Why is it important to discuss these events and social injustices in the workplace?
Well, that transparency is certainly important for the reasons that I just mentioned. Customers expect organizations that they know and trust to be able to communicate where they stand on issues of social justice and equity. And we're certainly no different. This probably wasn't the case 10 years ago, but it's certainly the case today. So you see a lot more brands, being very vocal about where they stand. You see a lot more senior business leaders being more vocal about where they stand. What I love about what that means for us at State Farm is not only are we being more vocal, we have the evidence to prove it. And it's that evidence that really encourages me and know that we're doing our part in order to make a difference. But recently we updated that message that you're referring to be more expansive. We know, unfortunately, we're living in a moment right now where many members of the Asian American and Pacific Islander community are being subjected to acts of violence, murder motivated by hate and racism and bigotry. So we've expanded that notion, that statement to include Asian American community, LGBTQ community, Black and African American, Hispanic and Latino, and others, because a lot of people are hurting, and they want to know that the companies they do business with care about them. Many people will make their business decisions as a part of that, but it's also good quality corporate social responsibility when we do that.
And looking to the future with State Farm, we know State Farm is a leader in the insurance industry. And where would you like to see State Farm in the future in respect to D&I? And why is it so important for State Farm to be a leader when it comes to representation and opportunities?
Well, you've heard me talk about being a more mature organization when it comes to diversity and inclusion. That's the language I use quite a bit. And I emphasize more because I want to acknowledge where we've been. I want to acknowledge our past. Again, this is not new for us. We've had formal D&I efforts for over 2 decades, but we can be more mature, and we're on that path to becoming more mature. And I also, kind of tongue in cheek, when people say, well, how do you know when we are at the highest level of maturity? I tend to say, well, I will know when we're a role model, and I'll know when we're a role model when other organizations and the leaders of other organizations say, we're not State Farm yet, but we're trying to become a more mature organization when it comes to D&I too. Now, I don't know if that'll ever happen, but that's my aspiration, that people look to us really as a model to follow, not just in word, but in action, and not narrowly, but comprehensively in how we show up when it comes to diversity and inclusion across that four-part framework.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And I love that you want to see State Farm grow. And you've already said you're impressed with how the organization and has taken on diversity and inclusion, but of course, all organizations can inspire to be better. So absolutely. I love that. And then I have a question, Victor. I know that this was a really big deal when State Farm relaunched Jake from State Farm, and they selected Kevin Miles, an African-American actor, for the relaunch. And I'm just going to mention it. I think the Drake from State Farm was the best Super Bowl commercial. It was amazing. Loved that. But how did it make you feel when State Farm selected Kevin Miles, and kind of we had this relaunch of Jake and this new representation for State Farm? Yeah,
I appreciate you mentioning that, because this has been just quite a ride that we've been on. So if you recall, we relaunched Jake not the Super Bowl that just passed, but the Super Bowl before that. So it's been a year since the new Jake. A lot of people may have interpreted that as we chose to have an African-American Jake. I will tell you that was not the case at all. We simply chose the right actor for the job. Kevin competed for that role. He was called back several times, and every time he continued to compete. And our chief marketing officer, Rand Harbert, tells a story. He told me this story at his home last year. This is pre-pandemic. And he shared it in a recent article, I think it was advertising, Ad Age magazine. He talked about all the people who were competing, and he had videos on his phone of some of the, people trying out for the role. I'm not in marketing, so I don't know what they call that, but he showed his wife, and his wife watched several videos, and she watched Kevin's, and she said, "That's your new Jake," because he was just that good. Now you fast forward, it's been a year. It seems like it's been 5 years since Kevin was Jake, but it's only been a little over a year, and it has gone remarkably well. He is so genuine, so authentic, so down to earth. You feel like you know him. He's so warm, and just a guy that anybody would want to be around or work with. I would love to work with Jake from State Farm, and so it's been a real treat. Drake was real fun. It was really hard for me to sit on that for the couple of months that I was aware, and I think it was a winner too. My 2 teenage daughters certainly thought so, and I vividly remember when that commercial aired. Literally, my phone exploded in my hand because it was buzzing from the text messages and ringing off the hook after people realized, because we had teased it. We said that there would be kind of something special. We wanted a lot of eyes on it, and it really surprised a lot of people. So it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, and Kevin, he's a great actor, and I think that was the difference, because the first person that was Jake wasn't even an actor, and Kevin's really been able to make this a role in all the commercials and everything. So that's been great. And it was the Drake from State Farm was trending #1 on Twitter, so it was all over the place for sure. I bet, Victor, you had a lot of messages about that, and I bet it was hard to keep quiet for sure.
It was very hard, but listen, I want to do one thing. I want to give the first Jake his props. There would be no Kevin.
Yes.
Filed as Jake if it weren't for the first Jake. So he blazed the trail, he cut the path. And so he's still employed with State Farm. We appreciate Jake. And he created an avenue for Kevin to step in, and it's gone exceptionally well.
For sure, definitely. And we have a question from Danny. So Danny, if you want to unmute and ask your question.
Sure. Thank you, Victor. I just want to say I've had an amazing time listening to you speak. Everything you said is just so educational. So I'm enjoying myself so much. But my question for you is, you started as CDO during the pandemic when employees were in the office. How did you adapt to that and adapt to the change of environment?
So we were actually not in the office. So we went to a work from home environment. I remember vividly, it was the second week of March. And so we've been essentially virtual since then. It's been difficult because we are a highly relational organization. And my prior time in distribution or sales, is a highly relational role, right? You interact with a lot of people. Relationships are important, really across the company. So I would say it's been difficult. I'm leading teams of people that I've never met in person before. Now, my direct reports, I've certainly met them and I've been around them, but there are hundreds of people underneath them, some of which I've never seen in person. So I'm eager for us to one day soon get back to the point where we can be together in some capacity. I don't know exactly what that will look like. That's still up in the air for us, like it is for a lot of organizations. But some sense of togetherness, I think a lot of people yearn for. I certainly do. I'll be at the front of the line when that happens.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And Victor, I have a question too, since we do have a lot of students on the call. How would you recommend that students can be active in being an ally on campus and I know we talked about being involved in organizations with diverse groups of students, but just making sure we're being an ally and giving voices or using our voice on campus. Just kind of what is your advice for students who may not be sure how they can speak out against, injustices and things like that?
That's a great question. And there are a lot of people who want to be allies or want to elevate their allyship. You have to educate yourself, right? And so that comes with a lot of listening, a lot of listening and connecting, being inquisitive, and making sure that you set up your questions with people that you may be looking to be an ally for in a way that they understand you're looking to learn, you're looking to grow, so they're not misinterpreted. I remember vividly, as everything was happening last year after my announcement, I got a lot of phone calls, emails, text messages from people said, "Hey, I want to do more, but I don't want to make a mistake. I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't want to offend anybody." And these are people that I know personally. Like, I know their heart. I know them as people. I've broken bread with them. They've been in my home. I've been in their home. But you can feel a little paralyzed. And listen, just because I'm the chief diversity officer doesn't mean I know the journey and the experience of every underrepresented or marginalized group, or every group that has suffered injustice. So I'm on my journey too, to learn and understand and listen and pay attention. And I think if we start there, we can slowly kind of build our repertoire and toolkit in terms of the actions that we need to do. I think it's a bit of a trap to think, hey, I'm going to decide to become an ally. I'm going to do 2 or 3 things, and then I'm going to be like role model ally next week. It's a journey. And so I would ask people to be patient, to show themselves a little grace, to grow over time. And I think if you do that, 2 things will happen. You'll grow in your confidence, and then you will be able to help others kind of do the same thing by taking the same approach. So there's not a one size fit all. There's not necessarily a template, but I would say be rooted in learning, listening, educating yourself, because I know I experienced this. My guess is a lot of African Americans experience this after George Floyd. A lot of African Americans got a lot of phone calls and texts, and some of those were wellness checks, but some of those were, I didn't know things were that way, and help me understand. And I will tell you, while those were well-intended questions and desires to connect, it becomes exhausting after a while, and you find yourself retelling your own personal experiences or ways that you navigate the world that, quite frankly, are invisible to people. There are things that I do consciously and subconsciously that you would never know unless I brought it to your attention. And I did that with some close personal friends, and they were kind of floored. But telling those stories over and over, there's a weight there. And so, educating yourself, finding those resources, so you don't put that burden entirely on the group of people that you're looking to be a stronger ally for.
Thank you so much, Victor. And I hope our students could really take that to heart and learn something from that. And so, unfortunately, it is getting close to 8:30 and we have to wrap up the questions. And that is all the time we have for discussion. Before we finish up, we would like to take a quick photo for the COB social media of the wonderful Zoom screen. If you do not want to be in the photo, just feel free to turn off your camera for this part. And we will also be taking screenshots of the participants list for those who need proof of attendance. So everyone just hold on a second. Okay, I'll have to do a few passes. There's so many of you. So everyone smile. All right, smile everyone. Sorry, there's like 5 screens. All right, couple more. Perfect, thank you so much, everyone. All right, and yeah, go ahead, guys.
And let's give a huge thank you and a virtual round of applause to Mr. Terry for being here and sharing his experience with us tonight. It was very insightful.
Thank you so much, Kai. Thank you so much, Lauren. Thank you to Dean Samanth and Dr. Houston, all the leaders of Business Week and the College of Business. It's been a real privilege to share, and I've had fun. I hope my time with you has been meaningful. What I failed to mention is I'm currently living in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. I will be making my way back to Bloomington. I say back because I lived in Bloomington from 2009 to 2015. I moved to Texas. We'll be moving back this summer. So I look forward to connecting with the ISU community and the College of Business in my return back to Bloomington Normal.
Yes, we loved having you here tonight. And let's give a huge thank you to all of our attendees for being here as well. And we think this was a very positive learning experience for everyone, and we hope you all enjoyed yourselves. So on this PowerPoint here, this is how you all can connect with Victor and reach out if you have any additional questions for him.
And we would like to give a big thank you to our Business Week sponsors. Business Week would not be possible without the generosity of these companies. So thank you to all of our Business Week sponsors. And then our last Business Week event is tomorrow. It is the keynote speaker with Jim Jacobs, CEO of Country Financial. You can just join with the Zoom. There was no registration required. So there's the Zoom link there. If anyone needs to take a picture of it, it has also been posted on our website and on social media as well. And if you want to be a part of the Business Week team, the applications are now open, and we're looking for great students that want to make an impact on the College of Business. And please look into our application and check it out on the website if you are interested. And then lastly, this is our website if you want to check out how to be a member of the team or other information about Business Week, and follow us on social media, the College of Business on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Once again, thank you, Victor, and thank you everyone for being here tonight, and we hope you have a great rest of your evening. And Victor, if you could just stay on with the team, but thank you everyone, and you are free to go. Thank you.